be basic, but let's make sure we're all on the same page. As you all know, a GRAT is a grantor retained annuity trust, where the grantor retains annuity and trust. Sounds like a good name for it. So transfer assets to a trust. I'm the grantor. The trust says, pay me an annuity for the next 5 years, after which it goes to my kids or a trust for their benefit or wherever I want it to go. 2702, as you know, says if you transfer property to a trust or retain an interest, it has to be a qualified interest, which an annuity is. And if it is a qualified interest, then my interest is subtracted. So if I transfer $1 million to a trust and my annuity interest is worth $990,000, that's a qualified interest, so the gift is only $10,000. Or if I make the gift $1, which I could do, or even $0. So 2702 just says that the payments have to be fixed amounts payable not less frequently than annually, and that's a qualified interest. And ever since the Walton case, which looking back is now 2000, so it's a 12-year-old case, prior to 2000, we were all doing GRATs that said, pay me an annuity for the shorter of 5 years or until my death if sooner, because if I died before then, it would be included in my estate and then it would come back to my estate. And the IRS had been taking the position that you couldn't do a fixed term GRAT. Well, you could, but we'll tax it as if it's a shorter of GRAT. And a shorter of GRAT, so if the remainder, if I have a GRAT that says pay me an annuity for 5 years, or if I die before that, end the annuity and give me the assets back, the remainder has a different value than if it says pay me an annuity for 5 years, period. In fact, in the GRAT, the remainder value is higher, counterintuitively, in a shorter of GRAT, because in the shorter of version, I've retained two things, an annuity interest and a reversion to get the assets if I die beforehand. And 2702 says the value of that reversion is not a qualified interest, and you don't get to subtract that. And so that reversion value is deemed to be a gift. And if I didn't have a reversion, if it was just a 5-year fixed term, then that deemed gift would be smaller. So the Walton family, fortunately, created from what I understand, a $100 million or so GRAT. I read actually yesterday, the Forbes list came out again, and I think there's 4 Waltons on it, and they're up to $26 billion apiece. So 100 million was, just a little nothing at the time. And they created a GRAT with a fixed term, and it was large enough. Well, I guess if it was half of that, it would still be large enough to litigate over, and they won. And basically said, look, we can do a fixed term GRAT, and IRS, you're wrong. You don't have to value that, even though it's a fixed term, as if it was for the shorter of the two. I forget what their IRS rationale was at the time, but it doesn't matter. And since then, we've been doing so-called Walton GRATs, a fixed term, and we can make the annuity $0 or $1 or whatever we want it to be. And so there are only 2 components in a GRAT, the annuity and the remainder interest. And 2036 and 2033 apply if I die during the term, even if it's payable for 2 more years. 2036, actually they came out with regulations in the last year or so saying how to calculate the amount included in the estate. It's not necessarily the whole GRAT, but it probably is. The formula for the amount included in a GRAT, so I died in year 3 out of 5. They say the amount included in the estate is that amount of assets required to generate income at the prevailing 75/20 rate to pay your annuity, which is quite a bit of assets. So if the annuity was $100,000 a year and the 75/20 rate was 2%, how much, what value would I need generating 2% to equal $100,000? Another way to calculate it, by the way, is take the annuity and divide it by the 75/20 rate. If you do any math on your notes, you'll see that unless the GRAT is ridiculously successful, a 10-fold increase, it's going to include all the assets. But I guess there's always that possibility of hope out there. So it generally will be included in the estate if you die before the term. And the source of the benefit of the GRAT, it's always important to know, so why does this thing work other than I throw it in and hopefully something comes out on the back end. The assumption for a GRAT is you use the IRS tables and use the 75/20 annuity table at today's 75/20 rate. And the assumption by the IRS using that table is these assets are going to grow at the 75/20 rate the whole time that they're in the GRAT, even though the 75/20 rate is going to change over time. And so if you do one today when the rate is 1%, the IRS assumption is those assets will grow at 1%. And if they in fact do grow at 1% a year every year, then you will get back all of your money plus 1%, and there will be nothing left on the last day. And the GRAT will not be successful. And if you look, I have an example here, 75/20 rate of 5.4%. $10 million goes into the GRAT. It's on page 51. If the trust grows at 5.4% every year, which is what the table assumption is, it'll pay the annuity every year, and you'll see there's negative $28, and that's, I'm assuming, due to rounding of some sort. So the last dollar comes out on the last day, and it's what was expected. So the game is if we can beat the expectation, if we can beat the table. If the trust does not grow at 1%, but it grows at 1.3% or 4% or 10%, then that spread is what is going for free. And so if you take this exact example, the $10 million into the GRAT, 5.4% rate, and it does grow at 10%, then you see on the next page that we move $4.89 million. Again, anyone that can get me 10% for the next 10 years, let me know, and we'll talk after. But that is the game, beating the IRS rate. And right now, it's the lowest it's ever been, and maybe the lowest it will ever be for beating that rate. So then the question is, how do we reduce the risks of the GRAT? What other risks? Dying before the term ends, not beating the rate. Not beating the rate has become a little easier, but it's still not easy. So one method is using what I call re-GRATs or rolling GRATs. Instead of a single 10-year GRAT, are we better off doing a bunch of 2-year GRATs and moving assets in and out every year? So I put the 10 in, I get $5 million and change out the first year. I take that $5 million annuity payment I just got and put it into a second 2-year GRAT. Second year rolls around. I get my second $5 million and change annuity payment. I get my $2.5 million roughly payment from the second GRAT. I take that $7.5 million, I put that into a third GRAT. First GRAT just ended. So after the first year, I have 2 GRATs. There's always one dropping off and one coming in. And it's like juggling. Every time I get a payment, I throw it back into another GRAT. And is that better? Is that worse? What is it? And I'm going to show how I think it's I would think always better, actually, unless you know you have an asset or are very confident you have an asset that's going to grow consistently every year, and you're going to live. So number one, you have reduced mortality risk. If you do a bunch of 2-year GRATs and you die in year 8, then 7 of the GRATs will have finished. And so if any of those 7 GRATs were successful, those GRATs, that wealth transfer is out of your estate, done. If you had done a single 10-year GRAT, it's all back in the estate. So we reduce the mortality risk. We just take these 2-year bites. And second, we reduce the investment risk of not beating the rate, or for that matter, increase the investment enhancements. Let's take an example. Let's assume we do, looking at a 10-year period. And over the 10 years, we have the following rates of return. This is the bottom of 52. First year is a 3% return, positive. Negative, next year is -7. Then +8, +6, +10. Good 3-year run there. Then -10 or -2. Then a +15, 12, 9, and 8. So overall positive, a couple negative years, various rates of return. And also let's assume a 5.4% hurdle rate, 75/20 rate every year for the whole thing. If you average out these returns, the average return is 6.2. That's higher than our 5.4% hurdle rate. So it was up and down and up and down. It averaged out to 6.2. Our hurdle rate was 5.4, so we should have a successful GRAT. But if you look at the next page on 53, we will not have a successful GRAT. It runs out of money. It's down to $23,000 at the end of year 9. and it can't even pay the last annuity payment. It only has $1,800 left and owes a last payment of $1,300,000 in year 10. It's all in the timing. In this example, you see what happened in the trust. We started at $10 million. It grew to, by $300,000, but the next year it shrank by $628,000. And if you have one bad year, as we all know from 2008, 2009, it really puts a damper on the rest of your results. And it takes a long time to dig out. You know, a 50% decline in the value of your assets. So 100 goes down to 50. To get back to 100, you need 100% return. You need to double your money, even though you only lost half. Still trying to do the math on that, but so you see, just because you have an average return that beat the 75-20 rate, you might not have a successful grad. But what if we had taken those exact same assets, exact same returns, and put them in 2-year rolling grads? And if you look on the bottom of 53, you see that. So the first grad gets $10 million. The first annuity is $5.4 million and change. The second annuity is $4.5 and change. But that first grant was not successful because the returns were +3 and -7. So nothing returned from that one. Our second grant, you see on the top line, got the $5.4 million annuity. That was the first grant's first annuity payment. That one turned out not successful either because that had returns of -7 and +8. The -7 pulled us under and it didn't recover. The third grant was funded with $7.4 million. That's the second annuity payment from the first grad of $4.5 million. It's the first annuity payment from the second grad of $2.9. So we took those two payments from those two grads, threw them into grad number 3, and that was $7.5 million. Well, that third grad had 2 positive years, +8% and +6%. That one turned out to $228,000 remainder. And if you keep going through, we have some winners and some losers, and the remainders all add up to $2.8 million. So had we done a single grat with these exact same assets and these exact same returns, we'd have 0 benefit. If we divide it up into 2-year rolling grats, we have a $2.8 million benefit. And we reduce the mortality risk. If they had died in year 5, we would have transferred several $100,000 in the interim at a minimum. And by the way, that $2.8 million, if that had been going into a trust for the kids and continued to earn the same rates of return, it really would have added up to about $3.3 million at the end of the 10-year period. Because that money, if you look on page 54, you see my trust and remainders received, and then those funds are invested at the same bouncing around returns, and we end up with $3.3 million. So we went from 0 to $3.3 million by doing 2-year grats versus a single 10-year grat. And reduce mortality risk in the process. Now the problem is, or not even a problem, it's the mechanics. Telling your client, we're going to do a grat, and we're going to do another one, and another one, and another one, and you're going to keep opening accounts every year, we're going to have to move assets every year, we're going to have to value those. Even if it's publicly traded securities, we need the mean of the high and the low to go in and go out. So there's lots of movements. But for $3.3 million, I'll move the assets, no problem. The other thing I've done, actually, from a practical perspective to solve that, I've used what I call sort of currency LLCs. It's just an LLC wrapper. It's not designed for discounts. In fact, it's specifically designed not to have a discount. The agreement says any member can withdraw any time. No restrictions on transferability. But it's just a wrapper. That way the client can say, well, here's the $10 million. Let's open an account in Jones Family LLC. And then we'll transfer the LLC on paper. We can do it in our offices to grat number 1. When the first annuity is due, we have another piece of paper that says 86 units are transferred out to the grantor and 86 units back into a new trust. So we don't need to open accounts every year. We don't need to move assets every year. We just need a valuation. Then on paper, we can move LLC units between the various trusts. That's just a pointer. I found it much more administratively simple. And the financial institutions like it much better as well. There aren't 2 trusts that are constantly opening and closing and opening and closing. It's just one account that they continue to manage the whole time. There's also interest rate risk. If we do a 10-year grat right now and it's a 1% rate, we know we've locked in that rate for 10 years. If we do a bunch of 2-year grats, well, I can tell you, I'm pretty confident on this one, it's not going to be 1% in 5 years. It could be 6, 7, 8, 9%, who knows? So what about that? Is that going to undo the benefits? Is that going to count against us? So I ran the numbers. In this exact same scenario with these bouncing returns, let's assume the first year's rate, well, we used a 5.4, was our 75/20 rate. Let's assume each grat, the rate is 0.2 higher. So 5.4, the second grat is 5.6 is the rate, third is 5.8, 6, and so on. So we're up into 7 or 8% by the time we get to the last one. Even if we do that, the rolling grat would still transfer $2.5 million over the 10 years, which is better than the 0 that the other one transferred. And if I increase it by 0.4 every year, so 5.4, 5.8, 6.2, 6.6, I mean, it'll go up pretty quickly, it still transfers $1.7 million. So even with the headwinds of these rates, the odds of transferring the wealth are greater. And I know I've seen 1 or 2 banks or other financial institutions have done a Monte Carlo simulation of what can happen over 10 years, and even assuming rising rates, that most of the time the 2-year grats are going to beat the one long-term grat, even with the rising rates. What about changing interest rates, the payout? So you can do an increasing grat. As I mentioned earlier, you can have the grat increase the payment by 20% per year. If you do the math, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And so if it's sometimes, there was no clear winner. So I don't think it makes sense to do that, because if you have a grat that has poor performance in the first year, you'd rather not have the annuity backloaded. You'd rather have it front-loaded. You want to get that money back and put it into a new grat, which is why if you look on 55, we can talk about decreasing grats, decreasing rolling grats. The best example of this, by the way, I had a client, or still have a client. In 2007, they were owners of a closely held business. And there were actually 5 unrelated families that owned the business. My client owned 40%. And they decided, let's look to potentially sell. They had buyers lining up out the door. The price was, each one was outbidding the next. Ultimately, they didn't agree on the terms. Some wanted to keep some of the stock. Some wanted to be completely out. Some said, we want cash. So the different families couldn't agree, hence your lack of control, lack of marketability discounts. And before all this started, by the way, we put some assets into a trust. We did a gift and a sale, and we did a grat for some of the stock. And ultimately, they didn't sell. And then the market tanked, and we had a grat payment due, and we didn't have enough cash to pay it. So we had to get another appraisal. And the appraisal said, the valuation we gave you a year or so ago, it's now 2/3 lower than it was, because no one was selling anything in 2008, 2009, and let alone a closely held business and retail type products. And so the value was so low that we got all the stock back out in the first payment of the grat. And we immediately turned around and put it into another grat at that new low level. 2 years later, they went public, far and above what their other prices were. It's funny money, as they call it now, the way it turned out. So when you have a grat that's not successful, what you'd like to do is tear the thing up, get this asset back out, and put them into another one where you can sort of start fresh. And that's where decreasing grat can help. There's a rule in the 2702 saying you can't have an increase in the annuity payment more than 20% per year, which suggests, so we can have payments that change. Because if you didn't say that, that implies we can have them change in the first place. Otherwise, why would you say you can't have it change by have it go up by more than 20%? And all there is a rule saying it can't go up by more than 20%. There's no prohibition on them decreasing the annuity payments. In fact, one of the proposals that came out earlier this year, I think it might have been part of Obama's Green Book proposals, which I don't know why the administration's put those out. It's just pie in the sky that if you look back 15 years worth of Green Book proposals, they say eliminate all discounts on FLP. So we see where that's gone. But one of them was not, as we know, putting a 10-year minimum on grats. Another recent one was no decreasing grats, which said to me, there's proof that we can. But they wouldn't bother saying that. So why would we want a decreasing GRAT? So and what I mean is a 2-year GRAT where, say, the first year's payment is 90%, and the second year's payment is whatever it needs to be to make the remainder equal to $1. And you can back into that number. It would be about a 10, 11, 12% payment, about 11% right now. So a 90% the first year, and then a little payment the second year. And the benefit is, well, first of all, if you're doing rolling GRATs and the assets go up in value, then that GRAT rode the increase. You'll get 90% of it back of the then value. You'll throw that into another GRAT so it continues riding the increase. If the asset if it declined in value, let's say it declined from $1 million to $900,000, that first annuity is going to give you the whole thing back. It's like you got to tear up the GRAT and start fresh. And now you've got your asset back at $900,000. You throw it into another GRAT. If it just gets back to your $1 million value, you've got a winner. So just coming back to where it used to be, let alone going higher than that, which is what you thought it was going to do in the first place, is going to give you a winning GRAT. So we'd rather get it out as fast as we can. In fact, we'd love to do a 1-year GRAT. I just don't have the nerve to do it. The regulations say it has to be for a specified term of years. And they have that S on the word years. So does that mean you can do a 1 year or not? There was a case called Kerr. It was a 1999 tax court case affirmed by the Fifth Circuit in 2002. It was actually an FLP case. But if you look at the facts of the case, it involved a GRAT that had a term of 1 year and 2 days. I don't know why 1 year and 2 days, but that's what it was. They didn't discuss that at all in the case. That just was, the facts are mother and father had a close held business, created a GRAT for 1 year and 2 days, and then went on from there. Which suggests, well, if that wasn't an issue in the case, then maybe you can do a GRAT for 1 year and 2 days. But like I said, I'm not the one to jump off the bridge first. So most people create GRATs with minimum of 2 years. But if we have a 90% payout the first year, then we're almost replicating a 1 year GRAT. And why 90%? Why not 99% the first year? Again, just trying to be reasonable, whatever reasonable means. I think I've gone up to 95% because the client said, well, why not 95? And I didn't have an answer, so we did 95. But if you use a decreasing GRAT, again, we can come close to replicating the 1 year. So let's look at page 56. So we know we had the 2-year rolling GRATs with normal annual annuity payments, equal payments. What if each of these GRATs now has a 90% payout the first year and a 10, 11, whatever it needs to be in the second year? And so you see the first GRAT, $10 million, first annuity, $9 million goes out, second annuity, $1.2 million goes out. The second GRAT is funded with $9 million. It got that first 9 from the first GRAT. And if you look through, the end result is that it transfers $3.8 million over the 10 years. So exact same assets, exact same returns, and when we did a regular 2-year rolling GRAT, it transferred $3.3 million. And when we did the decreasing rolling GRATs, it transferred $3.8. So we have the benefit of getting to start fresh, and we had the benefit of $500,000 more transferred over time. And it's really because if you have a losing GRAT, you want to get it all out as fast as you can so you can start fresh and not just get half out and start fresh. And if you look, each one of these GRATs is much larger because it got 90% out from the prior one. So it's basically each one of these GRATs is roughly $9 million apiece, as opposed to we started with 10, the second GRAT and the other one was only $5 million, the third GRAT was $7.5 million. It never gets to be the full amount. And so just the math of doing that is going to transfer. So 2.8 or about $500,000 more by doing the decreasing GRATs. And the results can be even more pronounced. I decided just to play around. What if its returns are 0%, 7, 0, 7, 0, 7 every year for 10 years? A regular 10-year GRAT would have zero benefit. A regrats, actually the regrats 2 years would also provide a zero benefit, but the decreasing regrats transfer $462,000. So both the fixed term of 10 years, the regular rolling grats of 2 years, 0 benefit if you have 0.707. But the decreasing grats, 90-10, 90-10, transferred $462,000 just because we got more money to ride up the good years each of those times. So when you're structuring grants, I actually once gave a seminar on why 100 grants are better than 1, because you could start with, well, we should do rolling grats and do a whole bunch of them, and maybe decreasing rolling grats. But then if the client has 5 different stocks, in general, it's better to do those in separate grats. If we have 5 stocks and 3 go up and 2 go down, then we just water down the whole return, and maybe we didn't produce a net benefit for this grat. Maybe the overall return didn't beat the 75-20 rate. 3 of them went through the roof, but the others tanked. If we had separated those into 5 different grats, then the 3 that went through the roof had a net benefit. The 2 that didn't provided nothing, but they don't offset each other. So hence you get, there's your 100 grats. So here's your 5, and they're going to be rolling grats, so we're at 10 next year. You need a client with some patience. Most do not have that kind of tolerance for that complexity, but